Attention, you're listening to The Todd Huff Show, America's home for conservative, not bitter talk and education. Be advised, the content of this program has been documented to prevent and even cure liberalism, and listening may cause you to lean to the right. And now, coming to you from the Full Suite Wealth Studios, here's your conservative but not bitter host, Todd Huff.
Yes, my friends, we are on it's hard to believe, this is day 6 now of our special series that's just giving folks a framework for how to discuss politics. And again, not to repeat myself, but we have people tuning in at different times. Everyone is not able to get every program, which we'll let it slide on here, my friends. But if you miss something, you can always go to the website. I'd say the best thing to do is to sign up for the Inner Circle. It's totally free. You'll get all the information emailed to you, including some deeper dives, some additional content that we don't have time to get to on the program. All you got to do is text the word truth to 317-785-1030. 317-785-1030. So we're just going through this, my friends, to give folks a framework, to give people the opportunity when you have conversations, or not even that, sometimes just to think about things clearly. We've laid a lot of the foundation for how we've gotten to this point. We've talked about truth, the nature of truth, what truth is. We've talked about human nature. We've talked about power. We've talked about incentives. And all of this is building to give us, again, a framework, a prism through which we can view the politics, the political issues of the day. And that's what we're doing, and I appreciate you joining us, my friends, as we take this very important journey together. More folks need to know these principles. You know, we used to teach these things, or versions of these things in this country, and now we don't. Now we teach that America is a terrible place, that capitalism is evil, and that sort of stuff. My friends, we don't want to let that continue to fester and grow. That will metastasize, and that will be dangerous and even deadly to the host nation here, the United States of America, or anywhere that adopts that way of thinking. So that's where we're headed today. I guess I should say we're going to talk about the purpose of government. And I'm going to, again, lay the foundation here, get us caught up, and full speed ahead we go today. My friends, let's talk about something really quickly here that's also important. That's your money. You worked hard for it, but friends, isn't working hard for what you believe in. At 48 Financial, they specialize in biblically responsible investing. That means they screen out companies that do not align with your faith and your values. They'll help create a plan that fits your goals and your purpose. The best part is that they'll show you how your current investments stack up against your values. Maybe they stack up really well. Maybe they stack up okay. Maybe they stack up terribly, but this assessment will let you know that, my friends. All you have to do is head on over to 48financial.com/Todd. Again, that's 48financial.com/Todd. Take the quick and easy assessment, and you'll find out to what degree your investments align with your values. 48 Financial, helping you align your money with your mission. Okay, so the purpose of government. So we've gone through some of these things. We've talked about truth. We've talked about human nature. We've talked about incentives. We've talked about power. And as you begin to think about these things, and as you begin to think, okay, I understand the objective nature of truth. Truth is what is. And we need to recognize that. And part of recognizing that means that we understand and accept our human nature. Our human nature is one that has incredible potential. We're made in the very image of God himself. and God is absolutely amazing. And we have just a little bit of that in us, our creative natures, our ability to work and focus on tasks, to love and raise families. I mean, there's a lot of that that's out there, a lot of good, but we're also fallen. And this is where I would encourage you, if you haven't already, to study the scriptures, because that gives you a glimpse into the true depravity of humanity. And once you understand and accept that, you also begin to understand that humanity responds to incentives. Since we're not idiots, although a lot of people have seemed to have given away their ability to think, their responsibility to think, the truth is that humanity is smart enough when there are rules that are designed a certain way, we find a way to minimize the impact of those rules on us. And that's not even all bad. That's just smart, right? That's intelligent. It's the reason why people have accountants to lower their tax obligations and liabilities and so forth. And it's the reason why, people just respond. We talked about some of these things differently. So now once we kind of understand those things, and again, if you want more information on those things, we've covered those the past 5 days now. The past 5 days, this is day 6. You can just go back and look or listen. So now the next question is, what is government actually supposed to do? I may even want to take this a half a step further backwards, my friends. I might want to start by saying, why is government even required? Now, that may seem like a radical question, but some people have it. And listen, there's nothing wrong with asking questions, right? The side that doesn't want debate are the ones who want to silence questions. They're the ones that penalized you in 2020 or shortly thereafter in 2021 if you had questions about the 2020 election results. These were the same folks who came screaming at you in 2020 also when you simply asked questions about COVID policies. When you asked questions like I did on this program, why, if a virus is smaller than the holes in the cloth masks, why are we, or any material, why do we think that's going to prevent us? I understand spittle and that sort of stuff, but a lot of people thought that they were immune to getting the virus and so forth. It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up, but they don't want questions. See, questions are a good thing, especially if you're pursuing truth. If you're pursuing truth, sometimes we have to ask questions that may even sound offensive to certain people, but it's how we get to truth. That's why no question offends me, and it won't. Of course, there are people who ask questions to try to make a point through the asking of questions. That's a little bit of a different scenario. But if you're truly pursuing the truth, you're going to ask difficult questions. And so you can ask, why do we need government? Well, my friends, we've talked about human nature. We've talked about the condition of the human heart. We've got history to basically support what we've talked about, or more importantly, what the Bible says about human nature. It's not good. There's been a lot of bad things that have happened on planet Earth at the hands of people. And so the truth is that people need to have some degree of law and order. You don't want there to be complete and utter chaos and anarchy. You don't want the rules of the game to be, what do they say, might makes right? Just to get the biggest, strongest, meanest, baddest people around to go around and basically take whatever they want, pillage towns and, abuse people and take property and all that sort of stuff. You have to have some semblance of law and order. That is a good thing. And when God envisioned, if that's even how God behaves. But when God had a vision for earth, of course, he knew what was going to happen. He wants there to be order. He doesn't want there to be complete chaos and tumult and so forth. And so law and order is a good thing. But we also know by talking about the nature of humanity and the history of government, we also know that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so we know that at the other end of that spectrum, that continuum, you've got a heavy-handed government that controls everything that we do. And that's not good either, because that's abused. That's used to beat people down. That's used to oppress. That's used to do a lot of bad things. And we've seen that happen a lot over the course of history, including a lot in the 20th century when, well, communism was rampant, big government was rampant, you had the Soviet Union and so forth. Anyway, so the founders understood that we want law and order, but we want to have the, how do I frame this correctly? You want to have the biggest government, the smallest government that can create the correct balance of law and order and liberty. And that's what they sought to do. In fact, if you know the history of this country, you know that there were two attempts. The first attempt came when the founders framed the Articles of Confederation, and they realized that they did not give the federal government enough centralized power to really handle some of the problems that they had to deal with. And so along came the Constitutional Convention, and they gave the government a little bit more federal power so that people, the government, could handle problems that arose in the nation. So that's how we got, I guess you could say, version 2.0, the Constitution. But again, the smallest government possible to give you the law and the order and the safety and the protection that you need. Now, the government can't protect us from everything, but it certainly has a responsibility to protect us against foreign enemies, to say the least, and to provide some structure, law, and order to make sure that people are not simply having their rights trampled upon, having their property taken, those sorts of things. And so along comes the government. And so that's the space the government is supposed to fill. Now, I would say modern politics rarely even asks that question. What is the government actually supposed to do? They don't even ask the question. They just, again, as we've talked about over the past several days, they give a bunch of feelings and emotions and say, wouldn't it be nice if we could eliminate this problem from the earth, and let's have the government do it. And the government obliges because that, of course, gets people's votes. That gets politicians more power, more notoriety, more opportunity to be able to stand up there and pontificate about all the great things that they could do if only you would just elect them, if only you would give them a little bit more of your tax dollars, if only you would allow them to take a little bit more from the wealthiest Americans, if only you give up a little bit more of your freedom and you trade it for their protection, you will finally be safe and utopia will be reached. That, my friend, is a lie straight from the pits of hell. It is unattainable and unachievable. Yet because, and a lot of this may stem from the fact that we were created to live in that state of perfect harmony, not because of a government that exists, but because of our initial relationship in the garden with God. And we yearn for that. I think we yearn for a return. I know we yearn for a return to that. And that's what God has set in motion to eventually restore that. He will make all things new. It just takes some time, especially from our perspective, our earthly perspective. And I think that that's maybe a reason why there's a natural longing for this, but yet the only one who can achieve that is God, not a bunch of people who say, hey, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. That is not the way to get there. And so instead of debate, that talks about the role of government, what it's actually even supposed to be doing, what it actually can achieve and attain, and so forth. We debate about who gets what. That's a big thing, right? You're going to vote for Democrats, and you're basically voting for Robin Hood. You're voting for someone to take from the rich and give to the poor, and that's considered a noble thing to do. If you don't talk about the fundamental purpose of government and some of these deeper ideas, you end up arguing about who pays for what benefits we're getting and who pays for it. Is usually somebody else, right? If it wasn't that someone else should pay for it, we wouldn't even have a need to think that we should use government like this, because we would pay for ourselves. But we come up with these ideas that someone else owes us something for reasons no one can actually explain, but they try to. They try to blame people and say the reason that the wealthy owes you this is because they've built their empires upon you and so forth. And all these stories, all these narratives that get attention in leftist circles, but for the responsible, for the people who want to take control of their own lives, they don't fall prey to this sort of nonsense. They also debate which group deserves help. This is where the power of identity politics increases its power, I guess, because you start dividing people based upon superficialities or socioeconomic status, and you can quickly begin to see how this becomes a very energized debate. You got, a poor race of this group of people and a wealthy group of that race of people, and it's just, you can harp against the one and blame them for the difficulties and challenges of the other group, and the other group likes to believe that because whatever the group is, you notice I'm not even using I'm not using race here, because it doesn't matter what the race is. This is how politicians manipulate us. This is how they control the narrative and actually keep us from even asking some of these more poignant and important questions. Politics becomes more of a competition over resources, and they convince us a lot of times that the pie, the amount of goodies that exist in the world, is a fixed amount. They don't take into account that capitalism actually grows the pie. And of course, if they do take it into account, they tell you how disproportionate it is. But what they don't tell you is how much bigger of a chunk we all get living in this prosperous nation than the vast amount of humanity, numbers of people who have lived before us. And so this is what it becomes. And government was not created. Hear me say this. If you didn't hear me say any of those other words, which you missed out if you didn't. But hear me say this. Government was not created to manage everyone's outcomes. Government was not created to get back at some mythical boogeyman that people erect as the individual or the group who is responsible for their particular difficulties. That doesn't mean that there's not times when people directly infringe upon your rights and property and those sorts of things. That's why we actually have a government, to have that law and order, to create a system of justice so that people are not taken advantage of and not abused and so forth. But beyond that, just living our lives, the government is not created, was not created, is never intended to have a role in managing outcomes for people. And that's what it's become today. And it is a dangerous thing, my friends, a truly, truly dangerous thing. So, a little pause here. I'm a little hot in the studio today. It was cold yesterday. It was cold. I turned up the heat. I don't like to do that, especially when it's been in the 70s. Turned up the heat. Now I got it too hot in here. I'm just not feeling it today. I am, as far as what I'm talking about, but just it's stuffy, and I don't like it. So, got to take a pause, though. Quick pause here. Friends, if you're living with discomfort, if you're tired of living off prescriptions and managing the side effects, you're not alone. A lot of folks are looking for something natural they can trust. That's why I want you to check out Christopher's Organic Botanicals. It's a family-run kratom company, and it's rooted in truth, tradition, and transparency. They partner directly with farmers in Indonesia. They lab test everything before it ever reaches your hands. No synthetics, no funny business, just the real thing done right. The horror stories that you've heard about kratom that I've alluded to on this program, because it's out there, and I want to address this head on because it is. And if you research, you might see, yikes, there's some bad consequences of this. Friends, look into what that is. It's a combination, that's the phrase I'm trying to use here, a combination of shady sellers that are selling synthetic garbage that isn't real kratom at all. They've made it into something that it's not, and they've created a really bad reputation for kratom. And so do your research. If you're convinced that this is something that's worth trying, you can start with Christopher's Kratom Starter Pack. Use coupon code Todd Huff. You'll save 10% on your first purchase. Again, the website is Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. That's Christopher'sOrganicBotanicals.com. Truth, tradition, transparency, my friends. All right, so let's cue this up so that we can take a break here. So before that last segment, I ended by saying government was not created to manage outcomes. Government was made to do the things that we've talked about, to protect us from enemies, to protect our rights, to give us a system of justice, of law and order, to create a scenario, a series of circumstances whereby people are able to live freely, their rights are protected, and they can pursue their dreams and ambitions, lead their lives as they want to, as they decide to do that. Worship whomever they wish, whatever they wish, and to not have any interference from the government in doing these sorts of things. That's what the government is supposed to do. So, I need to take a time out. Lots to say today, my friends. As you well know, I've loved this series, and again, we're probably going to pause it with everything going on and talk specifics on some issues, but we're sticking with it. This is day number 6 of our series to help give a prism, a framework to view politics through, which I think is greatly needed. Timeout is needed here in the studio. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff, back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. Coming to you here from the Full Suite Wealth Studios. Maybe you've reached that stage where managing your money feels like juggling more than just numbers. There's tax planning, estate work, investment choices, a whole lot more. That's when family office services can really make a difference. Full Suite Wealth brings all those pieces together into one cohesive strategy. Their family office services gives you access to a coordinated team. Keyword there, well, 2 words. Coordinated, working together, know your situation, all the facets of that. And it's a team. It's multiple teams, members of a team working together, giving you things like advanced options, strategies, private equity, private credit, legal expertise, all those things, my friends, under one roof. It's about simplifying your financial life, planning for the future, and making sure your legacy stays strong for generations to come. If you are ready for that level of support, visit fullsuitewealth.com. That's fullsuitewealth.com. Build your legacy, secure your future. Okay. Now, what is the government supposed to do? We've hit on this a little bit. I want to spend a little bit more time digging here, hitting some of the high points. They are supposed to protect citizens from, or it is, I should say, supposed to protect citizens from foreign threats, establish law and order, protect individual rights. Notice what I didn't say there. I didn't say establish them. I didn't say create them. I said protect them. Enforce contracts, right? That's another thing that I think we all know. We don't think about it that way. But if two people reach an agreement, this is what the court system is for, and one side doesn't fulfill the contract, or there's the dispute about what it actually means when it comes to some particular set of circumstances, the government is tasked with fixing that or resolving that difference of opinion. And then just provide a stable framework for society. Now, if you look, a lot of these things our government is not doing. These are the fundamentals, by the way. Is the government, when we had open borders, was the government protecting its citizens from foreign threats? When we had cities burning to the ground, was our government establishing law and order? When we had the government colluding with social media companies and big tech to get information or to try to silence the speech of certain individuals on some of these social media sites, is that the government protecting your right to free speech and your individual rights? Have they provided a stable framework for society? I mean, yes, in large part, we have historically done these things. But if you look at how some of these states have been run, or how the federal government has been run by the extreme lunatic radicals over the course of the past, I don't know, we'll say 50 years, 50 to 100 years even, that's not always been the case. It's not always been evident. But government creates the conditions, or helps create the conditions, for freedom to actually thrive and grow. And when it doesn't do it, when it doesn't do that basic task, your freedoms begin to suffer. And sometimes we don't connect the two, or people don't connect the two, that government is, it's abdicating its responsibilities, its abdication of its responsibilities. We don't necessarily, or some people don't necessarily see that as a direct infringement upon their liberty, but that's what effectively happens. That's what government's supposed to be doing. Instead, the left wants it to be used to interfere or manipulate the outcomes of people's lives. Even if they aren't capable of doing those things, and they're not, to be able to tell a constituency or a base that you can do that, I mean, it's appealing to some people. It really is. It sounds so good. It sounds like, to people who don't want to take responsibility, or who don't know any better, who've been lied to, who've been told that someone else is the cause of their problems and so forth. And listen, sometimes people can contribute to our problems. Sometimes our problems just happen, right? There are things that just happen. Sometimes it's our fault. We need to go look in the mirror and say, this is the role I played in this. That's not the case every time. Certainly that's not the case. I mean, it wasn't the case for if you're familiar with the book of Job in the Bible, which is the oldest book, it's believed. When you look at it's very old. We'll just say that. I don't want to get into that whole discussion. But when you look at life, it's easy to blame other people. We don't like accountability. Again, that goes to our human nature. It's easier to blame someone else. Government's job is to protect the playing field, not decide the score. I've been around sports my whole life. I started playing football in second grade. In fact, my brother for Christmas had gotten my dad. This is pretty cool. I can't tell you the name of the company because I don't know, because he got it. I did not. But whoever it is, you can send them old VHS tapes and they can digitize it, and they create an app or whatever. They've created an app where you log in and you can watch on your phone digitized, I'm trying to say this the right way, digitized VHS tapes. And when I was a kid, my grandpa, my mom's dad, he was like a dad. My dad was like a dad too. I had wonderful people that had been involved in raising me. But my grandpa was a young grandfather. I don't know. He was in his around 40, early 40s maybe. Grandfather. And so he was highly involved, going to all of our games, recording a lot of our sporting events, and played football since second grade. I think you could play basketball when I was a kid in third grade, and I played all the way as long as I could. Played basketball through high school. I played football through college. I always just loved sports. I did. Some people don't like it. That's fine, but I did. Ran track a little bit. Played baseball when I was younger. Baseball, got a good friend who's a huge baseball fan. Baseball to me, as a kid, I've actually grown to like it more, I think, as an adult. I'm still not like a hardcore fan, but I enjoy watching good baseball, especially in person. It's kind of hard on TV sometimes, but man, you go to the ballpark, it's really nice, and the weather's great. It's just a nice experience. But baseball was not enough action for me back in the day. Anyway, what matters here is to say, after I graduated and got older, I coached. I've coached I've helped with football a little bit. I've coached basketball a fair amount. I've coached soccer a fair amount, which I never thought I'd say. And I've refed. I haven't refed football, but I have refed in basketball. And so when I say that line, government's job is to protect the playing field, not decide the score, that's kind of the role of an official, right? You're supposed to make sure that kids follow the rules out there on the basketball court. I had to interject myself in a couple of near fights in the league I officiated a couple of times. I don't know that it would have gone to blows, but it got really intense. And a couple of guys went after the other person and shoving, and I separated them and that sort of stuff. So you're to protect the playing field, the court, whatever, not decide the score. That's the job of the government, my friends. It's not supposed to manage everyone's life. It's not supposed to somehow engineer equality of outcomes. I don't even know what that means. I do remember talking about this on the show. I mean, first of all, how in the world do you do this? What do people think government can do? The amount of magic that people think the federal government has is mind-boggling to me, but nonetheless, people still believe this. And I remember during the presidential debate, this must have been in 2020. Yeah, it was 2020 because they didn't know. It was 2020. 2016, it was four old white guys and a Clinton, including sexy Martin O'Malley. 2020, actually, that was 2016. 2020 was a big field, and the power brokers in the Democrat Party, after the South Carolina primary, all got together and tried to force everyone out and basically coalesce around President bribery. They thought he had the best chance of winning. But I remember when they were debating, and I remember looking at some of the numbers because it was a big field. I remember seeing this guy had 7 minutes of talking. This guy had 17. And I remember coming on this program even and saying, how does a Democrat Party who can't even guarantee equal amounts of time on a debate stage for whatever, 10 or 15, however many candidates they had, how can they possibly guarantee equality of outcomes for people? How can they ensure that everyone gets paid what they're worth and all this kind of stuff? It's just crazy talk, my friends. That's not the purpose of government. They can't even manage the Democrat Party or any political party. They can't even guarantee equal talking time during a debate. So, time out here for me, my friends. You're listening to Conservative Not Bitter Talk. I'm your host, Todd Huff. Back in just a minute. Welcome back, my friends. I hope you've enjoyed. I love this. I love talking about the things that are happening every day, too. Don't misunderstand me. But I really have a huge interest in talking about these bigger principles. It is such something that's just lacking in our society and our culture today. By the way, just anything that requires any degree of depth is overshadowed a lot of times. We're so used to sound bites. We're so used to one-liners. We're so used to watching people who are an inch deep and a mile wide. They tell us they know everything about everything as they run for office, but yet they can't even go beneath the surface. I had a friend tell me he was at an event, and there was people there speaking or a part of a panel. And some people that you might know, they're in the conservative space. And I'm not going to name names. I'm just going to share a story. It's people who are, just say, relatively well-known or at least somewhat known. And they were asked a softball question about something in politics. I don't remember the specific answer or the specific question. But he said that they just totally whiffed on the question. And it's just interesting because it's people who you would see or hear talking a lot, and yet you ask a question that has any amount of thinking required or depth, and some people swing and miss because that's just not what's out there. And I know that's not what a lot of people want, but I think if you talk about it in a way to put it into modern terms and just have an interest in these things, I think people want to hear it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But anyway, we should be able to give an answer, an explanation, a thoughtful response to some of the things that are out there today. I'm telling you that we have reasons to believe the things that we do. I heard Norman Geisler, and I don't want to confuse Christianity with politics, so I want to be careful here, but just Norman Geisler, a Christian apologist, I used to read his books a lot, and he had written somewhere, maybe multiple times, he had written, they have good questions talking about the skeptics and the doubters. We have good answers. We don't have all the answers, but we have good answers to some of the questions. Why aren't we sharing it? And that's the same way I feel about some of these important concepts. Why aren't we explaining this and shouting this from the rooftop? Talking about the role of government here today. Friends, let me ask you a question. Would you rather take 2 Salty soft gels a day or spend hours in your doctor's office talking about your high cholesterol? I know what I'd choose. And I like my doctor. He's a good friend of mine, actually. But Salty is an all-natural, clinically proven dietary supplement that lowers cholesterol. There's no prescriptions, no doctor's visits. It's not a drug, none of that. All you have to do is take 2 Salty soft gels a day. That's all it takes to take care of your heart's health. So, Salty.com, SOLTEA. Use promo code Todd. You're going to save 50%, my friends. 50% off your first purchase. If you got to get a 3-month supply, but it's not, I'm telling you, it's probably less than you think it is. That's my guess. But you're going to save 50% on your first 3-month supply and get free shipping to boot. Salty.com, SOLTEA, promo code Todd. All right, so we talked about what government's supposed to do. We touched on what government's not supposed to do. It's not supposed to manage lives. It's not supposed to engineer some sort of way that we're all getting an equality of outcomes. How is that even measured? How is that even remotely possible? How do we know when we get there, even if we can do those sorts of things? Government's not designed to redistribute wealth between certain groups of people. How would they determine that? Why would they determine that? Why do they think that they should insert themselves? I remember Walter Williams, who used to fill in for the late, great Rush Limbaugh. Walter Williams he would talk about economics. He was an economics professor somewhere in Virginia somewhere at a college. But just a brilliant man. And he used to ask the question, why do we think? He said, you wouldn't think of walking up to some guy on the street, putting your hand in his back pocket and taking money out of his wallet. But why do we think that we can elect politicians who do that very thing? Why do we think by having 1 degree of separation, I'm not going to go do it, take it out of your pocket, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to elect somebody who's going to take the money out of your pocket and put it in mine? Why do we think that that's a moral thing to do? And at some point, as he pointed out, taxation is theft. Government does not exist to solve every problem. It never can do that. If we give government the authority to do that, if we assume government has the power and the ability, we're giving them way too much power to do that. And that's a frightening place to be as a country. Government should not be in the business of doing things like guaranteeing income or housing, educational outcomes, healthcare outcomes. It's not possible to do these things. They certainly should be working to create a society where people have options, where there's competition in the marketplace, so that these things are as affordable as possible, but without trying to guarantee them. The minute government tries to guarantee something, that's when it becomes an entitlement. It becomes less available to the public. It becomes harder to get. It becomes regulated. It becomes more expensive, whatever. It never works the way. It never works the way that they tell us. The more government tries to control, the less freedom that we have. That's the trade-off, my friends. We talked about trade-offs yesterday, but that's the trade-off. I've got to run. Out of time here. Thanks for listening. SDG.